Comanche Trade Empire, 1750. Trade with the Spanish governor Tomas Capuchin. In the previous installment of my series on the Comanche Empire, I spoke briefly of how the Comanche people came to power in the mid-1700s because of their unique affinity as horsemen and because of their geographic location, which gave them an advantage in terms of breeding and raising horses. Much of the Comanche horse trading empire consisted of trade with other native tribes who lived in the northern parts of the central United States. Tribes such as the Ute, Nez Perce, Shoshone, Cheyenne, and other groups who lived north of the Arkansas River basin depended upon Comanche horses, and in turn provided essential foods and other goods to the Comanche. It was a period of great prosperity for the Comanche people, and for over a century, even as the United States was formed, Comancheria, an area the size of Germany or France, was ruled by the great Comanche Empire. During the mid-1700s, barter for horses with other native tribes was only half of the Comanche trade picture. Along with their desire for food and hides from their fellow plains tribes, the Comanche enjoyed a wide range of manufactured goods made by Europeans, most notably the Spanish and French. This included things like guns, knives, cookware, clothing, housewares, and a wide range of other things brought to the missions and presidios along the Rio Grande River basin in northern New Mexico at places like Santa Fe, Taos, and Abiquiu. Trade with the Spanish was often a volatile enterprise, but for a time, especially during the governorship of a man named Tomas Capuchin, relations between the Spanish and Comanche proved to be fruitful for both the Comanche and the Spanish. Since virtually all written records from the mid-18th century come from the Spanish, we can only make assumptions about what Comanche leaders were thinking at the time. It is unfortunately we don't know the thoughts or even in many cases the names of the Comanche men who made the decision to sit down with Spanish governors. Their actions were, in truth, as courageous and insightful as were any made by Europeans. One observation is that Governor Capuchin made an effort to appreciate and understand Comanche culture, and his policies, had they been implemented in the long run, might have resulted in a much more positive outcome for the Comanche people. Governor Capuchin, unlike previous and subsequent Spanish rulers in New Mexico, didn't insist upon forcing established European norms regarding trade onto native cultures. Rather, Capuchin sought to see things from the Comanche point of view. To this end, in the summer of 1750, Governor Capuchin invited a group of around 130 Comanche to live in a settlement near Taos. Capuchin established trade with the group and spent a good amount of time talking with Comanche leaders. Those efforts led to a level of trust between the Spanish and Comanche that had heretofore been unknown. In his writings, it is clear Capuchin saw not a group of savages, but rather a well-organized group of thoughtful people who were, in truth, remarkably similar in their ways as any supposedly more civilized culture. Capuchin's efforts to understand the Comanche might have failed because in the fall of 1750, a group of Comanche unrelated to the group living with the Spanish in Taos raided a few Mexican settlements in the region. In response to the raids, Capuchin led a group of Spanish troops against the raiders. There was a brief conflict, the Battle of San Diego Pond, and around 100 50 Comanche were subdued and taken captive. Once again, however, Cachupin proved to be insightful in his management and almost immediately released all but a handful of the captives. This action ultimately led to even more trust and more fruitful trade relations with the Comanche. Though once again we have no records of how the Comanche felt regarding the matter beyond word-of-mouth accounts, what followed was a period of 4 years of relatively peaceful trade with the Comanche. Cachupin at one point even published a price list of goods traded between the Comanche and the Spanish that included clear-cut guidelines for pricing, both in terms of Comanche barter and Spanish currency. Though that detail may seem trivial, it was, in truth, an important step. For the first time, a Comanche could arrive at one of the Spanish markets in the region at places like Taos, Abacu, Trunchos, or Ojo Caliente, and have a clear idea of what their goods would bring in terms of price. During Cachupin's 4-year term, trade relations between the Spanish and Comanche continued to improve. Cachupin's insight, his desire to promote peaceful trade between the Comanche and the Spanish, was meant to make things safer for Spanish farmers in the region and to provide greater stability for the sometimes chaotic Comanche societies. His efforts were successful, and they belie the notion that the Comanche were savages that could not be dealt with, a notion that sadly persists. Unfortunately, Governor Cachupin was recalled to Spain in 1754. Otherwise, things might have continued to improve between the Spanish and Comanche. Cachupin's successor, Agustin Villallon, was not as insightful in his dealings with the Comanche. Cachupin did return in 1761 for a second term as governor of the region, but he was forced to start again from scratch as Villallon had undone much of what Cachupin accomplished in his first term. It is often said that the Comanche were a savage people, but I think it's important to note that during Villallon's rule and under later Spanish and Mexican governors in New Mexico, the Comanche were treated more brutally than the Comanche treated the Spanish in return. The Comanche, in retrospect, were, in fact, less draconian in their ways than the Spanish, French, and Americans. The real reason we see Comanche as savages and Europeans as more civilized has little to do with who suffered. The Comanche ultimately died in far greater numbers than the European, but is rather about who wrote the history. I hope the next time you see a post suggesting Comanches or other plain tribes were savages without decency, you will take that assessment with a grain of salt. The Comanche were, in truth, intelligent in their culture, their trade dealings, and they were thoughtful and fair in their philosophical view of the world. They defended their land and culture just as anyone would. That does not make them savages. It makes them human. That's it for today's Plate of History Beans. I'll continue with my look into the Comanche Empire and talk more about some of the conflicts and trade between the Spanish and Comancheria. Now it's time for chapter 39, 40, and 41 of my novel, Hunting Charm. My novel is winding quickly to its climax. I hope if you're listening to that part of my content, you will take a moment to visit my author's page on Amazon. Perhaps take a brief second to review my book. It would be greatly appreciated. There will be a link to the page in the information below. Thanks again. Chapter 39, $5 Whore. Her father arrived on a sweltering Sunday afternoon with a handsome blond man on one side and a trio of dissolute ruffians on the other. Doreen sat with Ginny and Rita beneath a sheltering bowdark, avoiding the stifling interior of the house, playing cards, passing the time on their one day off. She saw Theo from a distance and felt an odd sense of excitement. She thought, foolishly, that their reunion would be pleasant, that her father might even be proud of all that she had accomplished. In the past weeks, Doreen had spent time considering their relationship. The changes in her own life had softened memories of the past. Her anger at Theo's bullying had grown into a sort of fondness. His advice about business had served her well, and memories of a time when she had still been possessed of a child's willingness to please adults had, in part, returned. She had no knowledge of her mother's death or the terrible transformation the past weeks had wrought upon her father. She hadn't seen Theo's moments of rage or the look of confused despondency that often followed. Doreen didn't know that things would never be as they had once been between them. So she was hardly prepared for her father's first words as he stopped before her. "Your mother is dead." Doreen, startled by the news, paused. She had been mentally framing an apology, but upon hearing her father's tone and witnessing the expression on his face, she realized their reunion would not be a pleasant one. "She died of a broken heart," Theo continued in an accusatory way, insinuating that Doreen's flight from their home in Abilene had led to her mother's death. Doreen struggled to remain calm. "Good to see you, Father," she said. I'm so sorry about Mother. When did it happen?" "Pack your things. We're going home." Doreen blinked. "I am at home," she said. "This is my business, and my people are dependent upon me for their income. I can't simply leave." "You killed your mother, and now you're going to kill me as well. Bodie, fetch me a switch off that tree there yonder. You're going with me one way or another." Doreen felt her spirits sink. How could she have been so foolish? "I am an adult," she said. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Certainly not Mama." "You were kidnapped, and your kidnapper will soon be in custody and hanged. I won't be disgraced by having my daughter working as a common whore." Once again Doreen paused, but now an old demon, anger, asserted itself. This time when she spoke, her voice was thick with sarcasm. "I am a $5 whore, Daddy." She looked at Rita and Ginny and grinned. "That's hardly common. I think you'll agree." "You were kidnapped and raped," Theo roared. "Did you come all this way to bully me? Well, it won't work. It hasn't worked in years, and I wasn't kidnapped. I left because I hated you." "Don't you speak to me like that. Why would I come all the hell the way down here if I didn't have proof? Why would I do that, Doreen?" Doreen laughed, then, matching her father's tone, said, "I hid in that wagon on purpose. I paid no attention to who was driving. I left home because I didn't want to be with you or Mama anymore. Get your switch, Papa. Go ahead and treat me like I'm your property." There was a long pause as Theo dismounted. He regarded Doreen with a look of disgust. Bodie, the one-eyed cowboy, handed him the switch. He swished the branch through the air a few times, testing its metal. "You had a beautiful home, everything you wanted since you were born. You're a spoiled child." "No, Daddy, not everything I wanted." At that moment, in an instant, something changed within Doreen. She saw something different about her father, a grayness of skin, bloodshot eyes that looked through her. She suddenly felt inexpressibly sad. She hadn't imagined that her decision to leave Abilene would damage him or lead to her mother's death. In an instant, the anger drained from her. "It doesn't have to be like this," she said.
"It is like this. You made it like this,"
Theo said. "Daddy, you don't look well. Please, Daddy, let's discuss this."
"I don't look well. You're right. I'm not well. We'll discuss it like adults when you begin to act like an adult."
The switch whistled through the air.
"Why do you want to be a whore, Doreen? You could have been a lady."
"Daddy, I know I've made mistakes, but I'm just like you. I like to have fun. I don't want to be a lady. I want to enjoy things. And we're making money. Lots of money, right, girls?" Doreen looked toward Ginny and Rita. Both nodded. "I know this isn't a respectable profession, but you always said that a respectable person doesn't get the job done. Do you remember that, Daddy?" Doreen looked at her father, hoping he might somehow understand. "Did Mama really die of a broken heart?" Theo stopped, and for a moment a look of uncertainty appeared. It was something else Doreen had never seen. Her father, who had always seemed so self-assured, looked lost. He lowered his head, breathing heavily. When he looked up, Doreen could see a single tear roll down his face. He nodded slightly.
"I don't know. The doctor said she had been taking too much of her medicine. That slowed her heart and something happened in her brain."
"She was alone," Doreen whispered, "except for her books." Theo's expression softened. He wiped the tear from his cheek.
"Why did you leave?"
he asked. "Daddy, I told you Doreen thought once more about her decision to leave Abilene. Then she considered all the eye-opening experiences of the past 4 months. "I had to leave," she said. "You raised me to be independent, then locked me in my room. I couldn't stay, and even though it was hard, I
"No, Doreen, this isn't my fault."
Theo's anger seemed to return in an instant.
"You always do this. You make it my fault, but I am just trying to do what's best for you. Now I want you home. You belong at home."
Surprising her with his quickness, Theo grabbed Doreen by her arm and began swinging the tree branch. She heard herself crying out, "No, Daddy, please, no, I'm sorry, Daddy."
"You're going back to that school when we return," Theo shouted. "I'm sick of your sluttish ways. Now hush up."
With each phrase came another swat of the willow branch, each more humiliating than the last. "I'm not going back with you, Daddy," Doreen screamed.
"Don't you speak to me that way."
The willow limb whistled through the air again and again, and Doreen fought back, just as she had at other times, scratching and grasping at the switch, pulling at it. She might have taken the branch, but at that moment a hulking specter appeared from the bushes, Henry charging to her rescue, as he had done months earlier by the Red River when Doreen had been raped in her tent. With a swipe of an arm, Henry Walker sent Theo Tarwater flying. "Henry, no!" Doreen called out. "It's my father! He's my father!" Henry was already upon Theo, shaking him like a rag doll. When Doreen screamed a second time, however, he slowed, then stopped, looking warily at the red-haired man.
"Your father?"
A gun appeared in Theo's hand, and a shot echoed down the ravine. Chapter 40. A Sickening Crunch. When Matt first saw Doreen Tarwater, he thought, that she was, as he had been told, a remarkably attractive young woman. Sitting beneath the boat ark with two other women, all of them neatly dressed, he was reminded of picnics on a Sunday afternoon. Things changed quickly, however. Theo, sitting imperiously upon his Arabian, called his daughter a whore, then ordered the toothless cowboy to cut a switch from a nearby tree. Matt wanted to intervene, wanted to use his well-practiced charm to prevent what happened next. But like an actor with no lines and with a pair of Theo's cowboys by his side to enforce the script, he could only watch the humiliating switching and the sudden appearance of an enormous man who sent Theo sprawling. An instant later, when Tarwater shot the man, he continued watching in horror as the giant stumbled, righted himself, and charged, swiping away Theo's pistol. Then with a punishing body block, the man drove Theo Tarwater into the trunk of the boat ark, a sickening crunch resounding down the narrow ravine. The two men guarding Matt both drew their guns, but before they could fire, Matt grabbed the arm of one on the right and wrestled the pistol away. With a motion that would have made Brant proud, he turned and fired at the toothless cowboy, who dove, unharmed, to one side. "Drop it," Matt commanded. "You gonna kill all three of us?" the cowboy growled. "I done read those books about you and your partner. From what I can tell, you ain't the one's handy with a six-shooter, and I don't see Mr. Hunter Brantley." "I'll put a bullet in all of you. Now drop those guns." "I think you're the one needs to drop his pistol," One Eye said. "Not a chance. You may get me, but I'm taking one or two of you with me." Matt backed away, determined to stand his ground. Then, to everyone's surprise, a shot from nowhere rang out. "Drop those pistols if you want to live." A second shot sounded and one of the cowboys' hats flew off. Brant stepped from behind a nearby bit of brush, the pair of pearl-handled Colt pistols in his hands. "Now," he commanded. The two standing cowboys looked nervously at one another. They had read the stories, and when Brant pulled the hammers on both pistols, the three cowboys dropped their guns and slowly lifted their hands. "On your knees," Brant said. They all dropped instantly. Brant gathered the pistols and handed Matt one. "If they move, shoot 'em," he said. Matt caught his breath, thanking fortune for Brant's timely appearance. It had all happened in a matter of seconds. He returned his attention to Doreen, her father, and the giant of a man who had come to Doreen's rescue. Matt immediately noticed something odd. Both Theo and the colored man were injured, and both looked to be in bad condition. Rather than going directly to her father's side, however, Doreen knelt alongside her bodyguard. She seemed to be crying. Meanwhile, her father struggled to prop himself against the boat ark. Doreen spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you do that? Oh, Daddy, what have you done? That's Henry. He's..." Doreen turned to Rita and Jenny, shouting now, "Go fetch the doctor!" The two women responded instantly, both running down the hillside toward town. Tarwater groaned, reaching for his pistol. "You are not only a whore, but that man is he's a nigger. Doreen, how could you?" Theo, overwhelmed by the notion that his daughter might have feelings for Henry Walker, lifted his arm, the revolver quivering in his grip. He likely would have fired, except Brant wrenched the gun from his grasp. "Are you gonna shoot your own daughter?" he said. Matt, meanwhile, remained focused on Doreen and the man who lay gasping for breath by her side. "It's going to be just fine," Doreen said. "You're strong. It's going to be okay. Matt could see that the enormous man had taken a bullet in the center of his chest. Blood pulsed weakly from the hole. Am I still your angel? Doreen asked, stroking his brow.
Yes, ma'am,
Henry said.
you sure are.
Doreen leaned forward, embracing him.
Don't worry, Miss Doreen,
Henry said, his voice nearly inaudible.
Leaving this world ain't so much. It ain't so much.
Why, Henry? You never told me. Why did you call me that? There was a long pause, the sound of the man's labored breathing, the churr of locust, the shuffling of the ponies. Hunting Charm, Chapter 41, Vermilion Skies and Blonde Hair.
It warn't nothing, just a dream I had.
What's that, Henry? The dream? What do you mean? Doreen asked.
Me calling you my angel. It warn't nothing but a dream of a poor man scared to face a hard world. I seen a pretty gal looking down at me, blue sky behind her, blonde hair. She warn't scared of Henry, not one bit.
I'm not scared of you, Henry. You know that, right?
Yes, ma'am, I know.
I never had a man tell me he saw me in his dreams.
I had that dream maybe 100 times or more, just like this here. Pretty blonde lady looking down here at me, just like this here moment.
Henry. The afternoon sun sparkled in the sky above him, and even though he couldn't seem to catch his breath, he felt nothing, no pain, no anxiety, no suffering, and he thought to himself that it felt grand to be free of those things. She was there, framed in the whiteness of a few clouds floating across vermilion skies, his angel, smiling at him, saying something, though he couldn't be sure what. Then something else appeared and took him by the hand, and together they left the ground. Somehow he realized his body was whole, though it didn't really matter. He no longer felt ashamed. He no longer felt physical desire or fear that someone might find him repulsive. He no longer felt worried that someone might be uncomfortable or fearful in his presence, and he no longer wished that others would know his pain. He no longer felt envy, that he would never know love or security or peace of mind, and he no longer wondered what he might do to find a friend or a moment when he felt loved. In fact, all those things seemed like distant concerns, and he chuckled at himself. Why had he thought he needed any of those things? Why had he ever imagined he needed anything?